Howdy, friends and neighbors! If you've been keeping up with your Advent devotional readings, then you've read yesterday's passage about backstage. The author compares two different backstage events: all that happens backstage when we hold our annual Christmas plays and pageants around the world, and what happened backstage that very first Christmas. That is, what was taking place behind the scenes in heaven. Both of these images bear more looking into beyond the single page we read in our devotional. So today, we are going to talk about some of the backstage elements of Christmas. I was happily surprised this year that we were able to have a Christmas program at our church. If you watched Sunday's performance by our youth, you may have guessed at some of what went on backstage. We had costume changes, players waiting in the wings to make their entrance, and props that needed to be carried on stage. Bonus points if you recognized one of the wise men's gifts. That's right, it was my insulated beverage tumbler. Cheers! Backstage to the original nativity, we're left to do a little more guessing. The angels certainly had a lot of work to do getting all the players into position. When Joseph almost blew his scene by making up his mind to divorce Mary quietly, the angels came to the rescue and changed his mind. When the wise men tipped off Herod to the birth of the newborn king, angels once again intervened, giving Mary and Joseph time to escape in the night to Egypt. Obviously, these heavenly beings were helping to shape events down here on earth. And while we're ever so grateful for their intervention that saved Christmas, it's still only part of the story. Perhaps our best behind-the-scenes look comes from John chapter 1, which echoes with the themes of Genesis 1, where we're told, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." Most people agree that John's gospel begins with a lot of symbolism, and that's especially evident here. It's hard to picture the action of the events, either on stage or backstage. We get hints of the Holy Trinity, of the enduring darkness out of which God transformed the nothingness into light and being. Perhaps we will not truly understand all these backstage details ourselves until we leave this stage of the world and join those on the wings. In the meantime, other backstage stories can help grant us greater meaning this Christmas season. I want to take a look behind the scenes at a few Christmas carols. We've known and loved these songs our whole lives, and yet I'm not sure how many of us know the backstage stories behind them. Knowing what went on behind the scenes can impart more meaning to these beloved carols. The first Christmas carol I want to look at is "I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day" by the American poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Most of us have heard of Longfellow, but few of us realize he's the man behind these moving verses. Fewer still are the folks who realize the heartache behind this song. Each verse ends with the familiar refrain from Luke chapter 2, verse 14, which says, "The great heavenly host of angels declared to the shepherds, 'Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace to those with whom God is pleased.'" Perhaps the King James Version is the most fitting. There we read, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men." Now, the word the 17th century translators rendered "men" didn't just refer to males of a certain age, but to all humanity. Still, the words echo with every verse. "I heard the bells on Christmas Day their old familiar carols play, and wild and sweet the words repeat, of peace on earth, goodwill to men." We get a sense of melancholy in that first verse, and the pain becomes more acute as the song rolls on. Why such heartache in A Christmas Carol. Well, Henry Longfellow wrote this song during the American Civil War. We think people are embittered against one another these days, but at the time when Longfellow wrote this hymn, the armies of the North and South had been killing one another for years, and there was no end in sight. Longfellow wrote these lyrics during Christmas of 1863. In 1861, just 2 years earlier, Longfellow had lost his beloved wife when her dress caught fire and she was fatally burned. The very next year, in 1862, Longfellow's son Charles, who was then only 17 years old, ran off to join President Lincoln's army. Charles fought bravely, but like many soldiers, he contracted some of the diseases that ran rampant through the camps. When he caught typhoid and malaria, he was sent home to recover, but in August of 1863, Charlie was well enough to return to battle and was shot through the left shoulder on November 27th, 1863. Though the bullet grazed his spine and nearly paralyzed him, Longfellow was able to retrieve his son and bring him home to recuperate, arriving back in Cambridge, Massachusetts on December 8th. And so it was that in the Longfellow household on Christmas of 1863, the holiday was a bittersweet one. The war had taken its toll in their nation and on their family. When we understand what went on behind the scenes, we're not so surprised by the later verses of this hymn, such as verse 3, which says, "And in despair I bowed my head, there is no peace on earth, I said, for hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill to men." However, the hope of the Christmas holiday triumphs even over the ravages of war, and Longfellow goes on to observe, "Then pealed the bells more loud and deep, God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to men." When we understand what was happening backstage, we can see that the hope of that verse is not born out of naive cheerfulness, but out of an enduring and hard-won faith. Speaking of the message the angels brought, the classic hymn Angels from the Realms of Glory hints at some of the backstage action that took place before that first nativity. The first verse says, "Angels from the realms of glory, wing your flight o'er all the earth. You who sang creation's story, now proclaim Messiah's birth." The tone is much more cheerful than our last hymn, but the true story behind the scenes is not without its sorrows. James Montgomery, who wrote this hymn in 1816, was left behind by his parents when he was only 6 years old, when his parents sailed off to become missionaries in Barbados. Though they hoped to be reunited, James was never to see them again. They both died within a year of one another in Barbados. James bounced around for years in boarding schools and eventually apprenticeships, never finding his home until he went to work for a newspaperman, writing and managing a small local newspaper. When the owner of the newspaper left England to avoid political persecution for his controversial editorials, James took over operations. His own editorials landed him not just in trouble, but twice he was imprisoned for publishing words that challenged the status quo. However, he had a strong following of those for whom he was a champion of human rights, and he used this popularity to share his faith and the gospel message. Thus it was that James published the words for Angels from the Realms of Glory. The text for the Angels hymn was a poem he wrote for the Christmas Eve edition of the newspaper in 1816. By the mid-1820s, the poem was being sung to a variety of tunes, and in fact, if you encounter this hymn in the United Kingdom or other countries, You might recognize the words, but the melody may be far different from what you're used to. Knowing these background events helps us to understand the greater meaning behind the words, such as those of verse 3, where we sing, "Sages, leave your contemplations, brighter visions beam afar. Seek the great desire of nations, ye have seen his natal star." Indeed, for all his controversial editorials, James Montgomery placed his true hope in Jesus Christ, the great desire of all nations, the one who would overcome all misery and corruption. The final hymn I'd like to look at follows a similar pattern. In the midst of difficulties and hardship, its message of hope and peace brought by the angels continues to inspire hope in those who sing it today. It came upon the midnight clear, that glorious song of old, from angels bending near the earth to touch their harps of gold. Peace on the earth, goodwill to men, from heaven's all gracious King. The world in solemn stillness lay to hear the angels sing. This melancholy hymn was a lament penned by an American minister, Edmund Spears, in 1849. Spears wrote the song to express his grief over the way worldly events, such as the recent Mexican-American War, tended to obscure the message of peace which the angels brought. The message of the song remains a timely one today. We live in a world where news outlets often focus on strife, division, and hardship. If we were to go simply off of what we see in the media, we might think that the world is in a terrible place. But we only need to spend time with loved ones, enjoying the laughter of children and the joy of the Christmas season, to remember that the message of the angels is still true today, no matter what the news may tell us. Spears' hymn reminds us to look for the good news of Jesus' birth, not the doomsday message of the media. For so we sing, "And ye beneath life's crushing load, whose forms are bending low, who toil along the climbing way with painful steps and slow, look now, for glad and golden hours come swiftly on the wing. Oh, rest beside the weary road, and hear the angels sing." Indeed, as all three of these beloved Christmas carols remind us, there will always be pain and hardship in this world. If we let it overwhelm us, we may miss the message of the angels, and that message is as true and as needed today as it ever was. Yes, we have hardships in life, but God is with us. God was born among us at Christmas and lives in our hearts always. When we consider the backstage events of these hymns, we see clearly that hardship is not a new thing. No matter how great the hardships of this world, the peace of Christ is always available to us if we are willing to have faith and trust in Him. In fact, Jesus himself echoed the song of the angels when he said in John chapter 16, verse 33, "I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." Perhaps it is only through the enduring peace of Christ that we can truly believe the angel's message and sing wholeheartedly, "All creation join in praising God the Father, Spirit, Son, evermore your voices raising to the eternal three in one. Come and worship, Come and worship, worship Christ the newborn King. Thank you for joining me for the Advent Midweek Study Series for the year 2020. If you missed any of the previous videos, simply click on the name of our channel, First United Presbyterian Church, Atlantic, Iowa, and then click on videos to see a complete listing of all our midweek Advent studies, as well as our worship services from throughout the past year. Thanks again, and have a very blessed Christmas. Bye!